relating to limitations on actions and extending the time to file a claim for damages suffered as a result of childhood sexual abuse.
Without objection, we'll accept that.
And my second one is RS 2375 concerning motor vehicles. Basically what this does is increases the criminal penalties for drivers who leave the scene of an accident when accident results in the death of a person or more than one person.
Without objection, we'll accept that. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is RS 2338, and this is the Cutting Healthcare Costs for All Kansas Acts Medicaid expansion.
Okay, without objection, we'll accept that. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on. First item we have on the agenda today is an update on the Board of Indigent Defense Services. Heather Cessna, Director of Bids. Heather, welcome to committee. And Heather, just ahead of time, I would like to try to condense this if you can, because we are running late, and so.
I completely understand.
Thank
you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Heather Cessna, the Executive Director of the Board of Indigent Defense Services. I was going to spend my time talking and answering any questions that you might have. We've issued a couple of reports over the last couple months, one of which was a staffing report that was requested as part of our budget bill last year by this committee on the impact of the last several years of salary enhancements on our public defender turnover rates. I'm going to talk about that just briefly. The other report that I also is on our publications page on our website at ks.gov is our caseloads report on applying the national caseload standards to our public defense caseloads here in Kansas and the shortages of attorneys that we have as a result of those standards. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions as I go because I know we're on a crunch of time, so feel free to interrupt. Going to the staffing report, the gist of the staffing report is that, yes, the salary impacts have been good with the adjustments that have been made over the last couple of years towards our public defenders. We suffered in 2019 historic turnover rates of 1 out of every 4 public defenders leaving, and in 2022, that rate went back up to 1 out of every 5, so we were suffering a 20% turnover rate. That 2022 turnover rate was after several years of no salary enhancements whatsoever, and also as a result, I think, of the impact of the pandemic and the Great Resignation that was happening in a lot of different industries at the time. However, as we know from the well-being surveys that we have been doing for the last 4 years, and because we've been specifically asking the question of our employees, what is it that's impacting your consideration to potentially leave our agency, they repeatedly say the same 2 things, which is caseloads, which is also staffing issues, and salary issues. And so the salary impacts that with the funding that has been given by the legislature and the governor over the last couple of years has made an impact. In 2022, as I said, we were losing 1 out of every 5 public defenders. We did a significant enhancement to our salary adjustments right at the beginning of fiscal year 2023, and our fiscal year 2023 turnover rate went down to 8.7% for our public defenders from 20%. So that's a pretty huge increase or decrease. The 2024 obviously is not over yet, but we're kind of in the middle of it. So far, our rates have continued to stay fairly low. That has been helped, I think, by the fact that we were included in the 5% adjustment that was for all state employees last year that was implemented on July 1st. So being able to retain experienced employees is vital to our ability to maintain our caseloads. And that's one of the reasons why I think the combination of these 2 reports that we've issued very much go hand in hand, because our ability to maintain sufficient numbers of our caseloads in our public defender's offices requires us to basically have the time to retain the attorneys that we have so that we can train them up to replace the experience that we've lost over the last 5, 6, 7 years of turnover rates that have been historic. And it takes time to build up that experience. And so As you'll see when we come back for our budget discussions later this session or next week, potentially, we're going to be looking at requesting additional enhancements to go to our salary requests, and also a handful of additional positions that go to some critical areas that we need to continue our staffing. As far as our caseloads report, the impact of our caseloads is that when we applied the national standards to our Kansas caseloads, we find that even with every position filled in bids, we are still in need of almost 277 additional public defenders, plus the requisite staff to support those public defenders in order to support our caseloads just in our public defender jurisdictions, which are jurisdictions that are covered by our public defender offices. Not every jurisdiction is covered by our public defender's offices. There are a lot of jurisdictions that are solely covered by our assigned counsel, private panels, and as I'm sure you've heard from the judiciary's briefing, we are suffering from shortages of criminal defense counsel in the private bar across the state. So one of the impacts of not being able to maintain qualified public defenders in our public defender offices is that we're putting further strain on our private counsel panels who are already overstrained with the number of cases they're being asked to take. So both of our reports are fairly detailed, and I can certainly go into more detail if you want to, but I know you're on a crunch for time. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm also happy to talk about this in more detail when we come back for our budget hearing as well.
Thank you, Heather. I guess one question I have is how many defense attorneys do you have on staff at this time?
So for our trial level public defender's offices, we have 123 public defenders. We need 400 in the jurisdictions that are covered by the public defender offices to cover our caseloads.
Right, you said you was short 272. So you have 123. Is that more than you had prior to COVID? Less? Where are we at?
Yes, we have increased in 2021. We received 45 additional positions, some of which were public defenders, some of which were additional staff positions. So that's definitely more than we had several years ago. I mean, that 123 includes the public defenders that we added. Last year, we didn't get any new, we got 15 new positions, which included a couple new public defender positions, but not all of those were for our trial level offices. Some of those were for our capital offices or our appellate office too.
Okay, so when you come to the subcommittee, are you asking for additional slots again this year?
What we are proposing is for our budget request that we submitted this year, because we had to submit that budget request before those standards in that caseloads report was completely done. We asked for 25 positions, which includes 25 positions total, which includes a handful of some positions for our administrative office to help us with what we anticipate is going to be an ongoing hiring into the public defender system over the course of the next few years to help enhance our capacity to be able to do that in a timely manner, as well as a handful of additional positions that we've identified as being critical that we need right now, with the anticipation that in next year's budget, we would come back and ask for what will essentially be a first round of trying to really address the caseload situation. The timing of when the caseloads report came out and our budget request didn't quite coincide for us to feel confident in making that initial request right up front.
And the caseloads continue to increase?
Yes, and that's one of the issues. We don't have an ability to turn off the spigot of the number of cases that are coming into our system. So what we have to do is deal with the numbers as they come to us. I think there is a conversation that needs to be had, and it is certainly a conversation that I am willing to participate in, but it is not a conversation that I can have by myself, about how do we lower the number of cases that are even triggering the need for these public defenders to be appointed in these felony cases. One of the interesting things, if you have a chance to do some light reading before bedtime on our caseloads report, is the number of hours, even just that's associated and needed even just between like low-level felonies versus mid-level felonies, that has a significant impact on the number of public defenders that we need to defend those cases. And so a combination of looking at how we're felonizing cases and what cases we're felonizing and how those cases are being charged, I think has to be part of a larger discussion, because we're not going to be able to staff our way out of the problem entirely. We need definitely more staff than we have right now, but there are limits to how many available public defenders or available attorneys or even graduating from law schools right now to be able to fill those positions. We certainly can do more with more staff, and we can fill those positions as we go forward if we're adjusting our staffing in a reasonable manner year after year, but it's not probably something that's going to be solvable on just that end of it alone.
So are we increasing the assigned counsel? Is that number continuing to go up also?
Not really. So we have been paying $120 an hour through a special budget proviso for the last couple of years now. One of the requests that we have in our budget is to go up to 140 to see if we can bring more people in, because even at $140 an hour, we're still paying substantially less than like the federal CJA panel of appointed attorneys, and certainly far less than what somebody who is charging for private pay would require. That requires additional funding as well, and that's part of our budget request this year.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Pittman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for being here, Ms. Hasnut. I'll just remind everybody this is a constitutional right, and the fact is we don't want people who have money to pay for their justice and those who don't not to have their justice put out there. 30% is a ridiculous number in terms of how much coverage we have for this. I mean, that's really, really low. 123 out of 400.
Yeah, for our trial level, yeah.
Could you give me a printed copy in my office?
Yeah, we can submit that, yeah.
I'd really appreciate that. Thanks.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Executive Director Sassana, thank you for your presentation. The thing caught my ear in there was about kids coming out of school. So we have a problem. We just don't have people coming out to cover these jobs. Is that correct?
Yes, and we have been working on, and this is part of what our building capacity to do better hiring is about with our small requests for additional positions for our admin offices this year, is up until like a year and a half ago, we didn't have a recruiter at all in bids. Now we have a recruiter, but she's not a full-time person. And so being able to enhance our human resources department so that we can do better recruiting across a broader area. Certainly, there are a lot of law schools across the United States, but our ability to recruit from those is somewhat limited by our own capacity to be able to do that recruiting. So I think we can do better and more extensive recruiting with some additional staffing support on our agency to help draw more applicants into the process. I think the good news is that repeatedly over and over again, what we find is people who are interested in becoming public defenders are legitimately interested in being able to do that civil service piece of, providing that constitutionally required source of defense services. And so people are willing to consider moving from other states to come and do that. It's a matter of us being able to reach out and get to them. There are, however, outer limits because in general, law schools during the mid-2000s and especially during the pandemic just simply have not been admitting as many applicants as they used to, and so they're not graduating as many people, and then the percentage of those people who are available and interested in becoming public defenders is certainly a smaller percentage. Additionally, if you want to do criminal law at all, when you're coming out of law school, you really only have two substantial choices if you're going to be able to pay off your student loans when you're done. And that is either to become a prosecutor or to become a public defender. And as is also put in our staffing report, the relative pay differences between the prosecutor's offices at the county level, who are literally in the same courtrooms doing the same cases just across the aisle, is significant. What we found when we did a series of CORA requests over the summer was that even if the prosecutor's office's pay scales looked like they were kind of comparable to ours. In reality, their lowest paid, brand new, most inexperienced public defenders were oftentimes making $10,000 to $15,000 to $20,000 more for starting salaries than what we were able to pay. So that's another reason why our pay request adjustment is included in our request this year for our budget.
Any other, Senator McGinn?
Just a quick comment. I know you have a longer road to go down, but I want to thank you for the energy and the efforts that you have made in the last couple of years for advocating for this agency, because it's very important, and I hope we are able to help you keep moving forward.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator. Honestly, I would not be able to have made that progress without the support of committees like this one that have, invested as we've made those requests. So I appreciate your guys' support as well, as that's been really key to some of the successes that we have been able to obtain.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I may have missed what you said. I thought I heard you say 123 is what you had today. Is that your FTE, or do you have a higher FTE?
Now, our total FTE count is 289.23, I think, roughly. I'm looking over at Martin, and he's nodding at me. So obviously, we have a lot of non-attorney staff, and we do have a significant portion of appellate and capital attorneys as well. But the caseloads problem in particular is really focused on the trial level attorneys. So when I talk about 123 public defenders, we're talking about trial level, non-capital public defenders.
Thank you very much.
Seeing no other questions, Heather, thank you a lot. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll have HB 2302 funding update from the Kansas Water Office, and we'll start out with Connie Owen, Director of the Kansas Water Office. Connie, welcome committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for committee for having me today. This is an informational session on House Bill 2302 that was passed last session, and it infused a lot of additional money into the State Water Plan Fund. So thank you very much for that. And in the interest of time, we'll kind of get clipping through here. I believe there's a slide deck available. If not, you have them in print. So go past okay, next slide, please. So the Senate sub for House Bill 2302 last year did two major things. The top one with that little yellow dot is that it appropriated $52 million to pay off remaining reservoir debt. The Kansas Water Office contracts with the Corps of Engineers for storage space in the federal reservoirs, and this was a strategy for getting the remainder of that debt paid off, saving the state millions and millions of dollars. The money is currently with the state treasurer, earning money because the interest rates on those contracts was lower than the interest rate it could be earning. But that is a strategy for paying off those debts completely, so that's very, very helpful. The next dot is really getting us into why I'm here before you, and this is the additional $35 million from State General Fund that was infused into the State Water Plan Fund. And I would kind of make a mention at the outset that this, as you probably remember, the State Water Plan Fund is a single discrete fund that is to implement the programs and projects that are recommended by the Kansas Water Plan. And it is largely implemented by three different agencies, by the Water Office and the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Environment. So the three agencies are funded for State Water Plan activities through the State Water Plan Fund. This additional $35 million from this particular appropriation included those three bills, the three items, the bullets below that, which was $18 million that goes into the State Water Plan Fund, and $5 million for a technical assistance grant fund, and $12 million for a new water projects grant fund. And I'll tell you a little more about the grant funds in a moment. Next slide. This is another depiction of how that broke out. And because the money was appropriated, including FY24, then there was an additional $18 million to be spent in FY24 by these three agencies. And this kind of breaks out the amounts that went to each. I would point out that the mechanism that was chosen was the $18 million went into a line item in the Kansas Water Office's component of the State Water Plan Fund, and then amounts were transferred out to the other two agencies. Next slide. And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll have the other two agencies present on their FY24 expenditures.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Was there any questions for Connie before she sits down?
I'll be back.
Oh, okay, you'll be back. Okay, thank you. Next, we'll have Earl Lewis, Chief Engineer of the Kansas Department of Ag. Earl, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. Good to see you all this morning. I've got two, hopefully quick updates. And again, this is about FY24 dollars. So I think the overall strategy here, and you'll see it not only with our Department of Agriculture's pieces, but also KDHE and the Water Office, is tried to look at maybe some impactful spending that we could do in the short term. And so there were two items that came to the Kansas Department of Agriculture totaling $10 million. $7 million for the Rattlesnake Creek and Quivira impairment issue. And I know that that's one that maybe you've heard about and we've talked about a number of times with folks. We have a work group that we are engaged with, covering a lot of different stakeholders, local GMD, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, trying to make sure that we're putting these funds to use. We're actually having a work group meeting on Friday and have been working with those stakeholders in advance of that on things such as water rights purchase or leasing to try and reduce the overall demand on the aquifer, as well as potential for a pilot augmentation project. The local GMD, Groundwater Management District, is working on a long-term augmentation project. We want to try and see if we can move that forward more quickly and also make sure that that's going to be a solution for the long term. So we are working on getting that spent here over the remainder of the fiscal year or calendar year. Also, $3 million for dam construction or rehabilitation, primarily focused on rehab. We've got a number of dams across the state, particularly high hazard dams. Think about areas that are populated or maybe have homes or high traffic roads below them that are in need of repair. A lot of those are owned by watershed districts, cities, counties. A number of them are owned by private individuals or organizations. And so they often have, these dam repairs are often fairly expensive. And so there's been a cost share program. We want to try and get more dams fixed and expand the opportunities beyond what we've traditionally done. Traditionally, it's primarily been watershed districts, but there's a number of other categories that we're going to try and work on as well. So $3 million for that, and we'll have an announcement for funding here in the next month and get some of those projects underway as well. So that's the two that we have for the Department of Agriculture, and is certainly happy to answer questions whenever is appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
I think we'll just wait till the end, means we're triple teaming this, so.
You bet.
Okay.
So with your permission, I'll turn it over to Leo Henning with Department of Health and Environment.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Leo Henning, Deputy Secretary and Director of the Environmental KDHE. Leo, welcome committee.
Well, thank you, Chairman and committee members. Happy to be here. I'm going to go over the funding that KDHE Division of Environment received. It was $5.8 million. 3.2 million of that is for our small town infrastructure. We have started a program previously, and this is additional follow-up money to that to help the small towns upgrade their drinking water and wastewater treatment systems. This money is for small communities. The small, we mean less than 1,000, but many of the loans that we've already given out previously are for really communities of around 200 to 300. So these are communities that can't afford a loan to upgrade their facilities, so they're kind of stuck, and this money allows them to come back into compliance with federal standards, and it's been a very popular program. The next one is we received $1.5 million to deal with some abandoned or orphan contaminated sites around the state. We identified 6 of these sites that we are going to try to move all the way through to closure with this $1.5 million. So they will be off the books. The next one is a $500 or $50,000 for a pilot project to identify and remove trash from entering into our rivers and streams. We are in discussions with some of the municipalities along the Kansas River to look at pilot projects to try to keep the trash that is unfortunately out there from washing into the street gutters and then going out into the rivers. So there's an educational portion of this also. And we want to get the word out that whatever you throw on the ground does ultimately end up into our rivers. So let's deal with our trash appropriately. And then the last one there is a little over $1 million for restarting the groundwater monitoring program in the state. That groundwater monitoring is targeted for water quality issues. We have a great system for measuring the amount of water we have in our reservoir or in our aquifers, but we don't have a very good system for monitoring the quality of that water. So this used to be a program that we had years ago. It was cut when funding was reduced. We are bringing this back because decision makers need that information as to the quality of the water that is underneath us. We are going to take that money and send that out to the Kansas Geological Survey. They're more adept at doing this type of work. They already do the water quantity, so it makes sense for them to pour water samples while they're doing the water quantity work. So with that, I am completed with my update, and if you're okay, I will turn it back to Connie.
Yes.
Okay, and on the next slide, then you'll see the Kansas Water Office expenditures from the FY24, additional $18 million, and $700,000 is for High Plains Aquifer Aerial Electromagnetic Data Collection, which again is in partnership with the Kansas Geological Survey, and they will be gathering data on an aerial basis to help get more accurate information on the aquifer over GMD4, Groundwater Management District number 4, to help improve their quality models to help us better manage the Ogallala Aquifer in that area. $500,000 for High Plains Aquifer feedlot and dairy water reuse and reclamation. And we're seeing a lot of interest from dairies and livestock operations to have water reuse programs, but they're very expensive. And the reason these are important is because this reduces the demand for water out of the Ogallala Aquifer. So we're pleased to be able to help support in those efforts. $500,000 for the Kansas Water Office Grant Program Administration. I'll describe to you the 2 new grant programs in a moment, but those grant programs required us to take on a duty that we had not previously had. We did not previously administer any grant programs, so we needed some support for staffing and software administration of that. Then the $350 for grant partnership support, which sounds a lot like what I just said, but it is different because this is to provide support for accessing federal dollars. So we need a different kind of skill set and a different kind of task to be accessing the BIL money and the infrastructure money at the federal level. Then $150,000 for Kansas Water Plan Education and Outreach. And we have a constant demand everywhere we go for additional information to the public for what are water issues, what are our water supplies like. So we are always trying to enhance our water education and outreach, which is another major emphasis in the Kansas Water Plan. Next slide, please. So from what you've heard from the 3 of us, the FY24 priorities basically centered on advancing implementation of the Kansas Water Plan, pursuing additional water plan leveraging opportunities, addressing emerging issues and shovel-ready efforts, investing in data and monitoring to improve our groundwater management quantity and quality-based, and focus on one-time expenditures. And as you heard from Earl about the Rattlesnake Creek investment and from Leo about the small rural communities support. Next slide, please. Now, the grant funds. So the bill, HB 2302, created 2 new grant funds, a water technical assistance fund. This is primarily to help municipalities or special districts related to water to, in effect, get in the game. Maybe they have a need, but they don't have the engineering, they don't have the planning, they don't have the grant writing expertise, they don't have the money to hire that. So this is a grant fund to help them hire that kind of expertise. The Water Project Grant Fund is, as it says, water projects, different kinds of infrastructure, actually building things, repairing things, maintaining infrastructure that exists. $5 million is what we have to award each year. This is a 5-year program under 2302. $5 million for the technical assistance and $12 million for the water projects. Our first application period for both of these ended the end of December, essentially, after a 6-week live application opportunity. In just 6 weeks, we had, for the technical assistance, 122 applications requesting $56 million, and we have 5 to give out. The Water Project Grant Fund, in the same period, 187 applications requesting a total of $323 million, and we have 12 to award. So I think this is, could not be a clearer demonstration of the need that communities and special districts have for support for the water needs they have, particularly in the area of infrastructure. And I would point out that the eligible applicants for both of these funds are municipalities and, according to the statute, special districts related to water. And there is a prioritization in the statute that lists a number of different criteria, but there's a very heavy emphasis on communities that are small, 2,000 population and less. Next slide. Here you see our contact information, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I would also mention to you that each of you would have received a copy of the Water Authority's annual report in your mailboxes. And this is the report that the Water Authority puts out every year talking about the State Water Plan Fund and what was spent last year, the accomplishments made, policy recommendations, as well as their recommendations for FY25 budget. But that's another topic for another day. So,
Thank you. Questions for Connie or Earl or Leo? Senator Pittman.
Mr. Chair, just real quickly, Connie, thank you so much. Being in Northeast Kansas, sometimes we have as much water as we want, and we may not feel it as much as the rest of the state. We appreciate these investments in the rest of the state to help advance this water plan for those citizens out there. Is there a way to look at this online to say, hey, where are these projects being implemented geographically across the state?
the ones that are the subject of the grants, we don't yet have that up and available. We're in the development for the evaluation period right now, so we don't have that displayable on the website for what's been applied for. But that will be something that will be available.
What about for some of the other investments like on Rattlesnake Creek and all this? Is there a way to look at how much money has gone to different locations like that?
Well, the State Water Plan Fund expenditures are in the annual report, which is also on our website. And is there anywhere else?
I would say not at this time, but that's one of the things that the administration is looking at, is trying to provide that information online, kind of as a one place for folks to go and look for both opportunities for funding as well as what the funding is going towards. Sure. So that's in development.
Well, and one last question is, we put together this state water plan and it's a great effort. Do we have a way to track beyond just today and next year how we're tracking on a long, the whole thing was looking out over a number of decades. Is there a way to look at it and say, here's where we're at on this initiative and how far we've come along on this, and whether we're in yellow, green, or how much progress we've made along these ways, kind of a strategic roadmap, as it were?
Well, it's very interesting that you say that and very timely, because next week, the Kansas Water Authority will be meeting here in Topeka Wednesday morning at the public library, and that kind of strategic plan is exactly what they plan to talk about.
Well, hopefully our water here in Topeka is all fixed up by then, too.
I think so, too.
Thank you.
We may be bringing in a lot of bottled water.
Senator McGinn.
Yeah, I was wondering if Leo was going to extend it past the 100 or whatever, 200 to Topeka to clean that up. But my question is a little bit back to the senator's question on Rattlesnake Creek. Is there a way to get, I know it's in the book that I just got, haven't gone through, we made a lot of changes, but the plan, do we have a plan yet of how we're going to do this that coincides with what the feds, the federal government is saying that they have to do?
Yeah, so I would say we have a plan of what we will do absent other success on either water right retirements or those kind of things. We have an administration plan, and we're going to put that out for folks to be able to see here in the very near future. The purpose of the work group is to say, what are the other opportunities we can do short of when we talk about administration, we're talking about either reducing people's ability to pump or shutting them off. And so we don't have a fully developed plan. We will over the next few months of what are other things, again, such as augmentation, such as water right retirement, that we can put in place that will kind of avoid some of the regulatory side of it. And we'll have that available as soon as we can get it developed.
Well, it's going to take both technology changes as well as water reduction.
Correct.
Use.
Yep.
So I'll be interested in hearing more about that. And then I think Leo left, didn't he? Yeah. Okay. No, there he is. Sorry, you're on the front row now. I'm looking over there. Okay, just wondered why you couldn't share some of the $50,000 on the surface water trash removal.
I'm sorry.
Surface water trash removal.
Yes,
Couldn't share that with South Central Kansas. We have, two rivers that come together.
yes, it is any river in the state. But right now, I'll be honest, it looks like Topeka and Lawrence are the two that have stepped up initially to start the pilot project.
So we need to
Don't hate
step it
me.
up a little. All right, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of a follow-up to Senator McGinn. 7 million and 35 million is a big number. Quivira National Wildlife, how much money do we think we're going to get out of the feds on that?
So time will tell a little bit, but so the local groundwater management district is in the middle of the NEPA process in either their augmentation well field or other opportunities. They're looking at multiple tens of millions of dollars. So we'll see what the number ends up being, but 20, 30, 40 million dollars is kind of what they're looking for. You're right, this is a big number for this time. I think the administration has tried to be clear that this is kind of a one-time investment from the state to try and speed that along and leverage those dollars. That we don't expect that there's going to be, $7 million every year for this kind of effort.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one kind of goes back to the orphan sites. So we cleaned up 6 of them, and I think if I wrote this down, like $250,000 apiece average. My question is, how many orphan sites do we have in Kansas that we're aware of? That we have a problem to clean up?
Yeah, I believe roughly it's around 135 orphan sites that are in the program. So this would deal with 6 of them.
Senator Petty.
This is a question for Connie. Connie, on the last page, you mentioned about the Water Technical Assistance Fund summary and the 122 applications submitted. So, and you also then share with us that there's a heavy emphasis on the communities of 2,000 and smaller. So would that be the bulk of those 122, or did you also have like applications from, say, a city my size, Kansas?
I'm going to look to our grant expert on our staff, Do you, Victoria Asbury? These have been coming in, as I say, just the end of December, so I'm not sure that we have all of those criteria figured out, but we have a variety of sources, right? Half of it, okay. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I misunderstood you, but we have $52 million we're going to pay off those bonds for the 3 reservoirs. Is that correct? Or maybe 2 reservoirs, Milton and Perry?
They're contracts, sir, they're not bonds.
Right, but we're paying those off.
Currently, the money is being invested by the state treasurer's office because the interest rate on those contracts was lower than the interest rate they could earn. So they're earning some money in the meantime with the plan to then pay off the Corps of Engineers contracts after having earned some money on interest in the investment, if that makes sense to you.
What is the principal payment per year on that? I mean, you
Principal
don't have
payment per year.
you don't have to answer that, but I think the reason that we put the $52 million in there was to get rid of those 3.
No, Senator. We did the arbitrage on that project, and the money is there. At some point in time, if the arbitrage, if the interest is lower or as low as the bonds, that money is there to pay it off. But I think we'd made like roughly $1 million. Senator Fagg worked on that. Senator Fagg?
Over $1 million. I'm proud. I played with 485 and we average, I think, 522. We're over 5. Plus, we can pay it off at any time. So,
Right, and the statute itself designates that when the interest situation flips, then the debt will be paid off. The money will be pulled out of investment and the debt will be paid off. And there's another condition in which the money would be pulled out of investment and the debt paid off, and that is if the state needs control of the water. If the water office designates that we need control of that storage, because even though we have a contract in these reservoirs for a certain amount of storage, we don't have control over it until we've paid for it. So once we have paid for the total amount we have contracted for, then the Corps of Engineers cannot use that water for their operations. They can't, they have to protect that and keep that there for our uses. So if there comes a time when we need to control the rest of that we haven't paid for yet, then there's a mechanism through the Finance Council that we can say we need control of the water, we need to pay off the debt. That's the other mechanism for pulling the money out.
Thank you.
One final question. This is for Earl. Earl, that GMD area at the Rattlesnake, Quivira. Correct. Is that a closed area or are they still poking holes down there?
It's closed by regulation, yep.
Okay, so the area east of there, when you get over in the Purdy Prairie area?
Correct.
Is that a different GMD?
It is. So the area where Rattlesnake Creek is at is Big Bend Groundwater Management District number 5, Management District number 5. A little bit further east is Equisbed's GMD number 2. So, and they are not closed by regulation. Most of that area is fully developed. So there's not a lot of new wells, but there is some.
Because I see it all the time. Just like here we are just west of there now, we're going to try to, reduce the wells and numbers, and yet we're giving new permits east of there and poking more holes. It's just,
yeah. Well, I would say that, I mean, I think over time we've gotten better information and we've got more understanding of how things work. And so I think that we are doing things much more in balance as we, in the Equisbeds. A lot of that area that we're talking about in the Rattlesnake Creek really developed in the 70s, in the late 70s, early 80s, really before we had a lot of these controls. We had the ability to do a lot of these controls. So it kind of got ahead of us, if you will. Not that we don't have some issues coming, but I think we're in better shape than we were.
Good. I'm glad to hear it's closed, because if we're going to turn around and try to buy water rights,
Correct.
Poke more holes. Thank you. Well, Connie, Earl, Leo, thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. Next, we're going to have an update on CAPERS, and including Tier 3. Alan Conroy, the Executive Director of CAPERS. Alan, welcome committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Happy session. I've got some good news, and as the chair indicated, we're going to spend mainly talking about CAPERS 3, but I've got some good news to share on the investment and the actuarial front, and do that. On slide 3 of my presentations, and I think you got a hard copy there as well. Just to remind you, in terms of our Board of Trustees, we have a new trustee, Derek Kreifels from Shawnee, is our newest trustee appointed by the Speaker. Trustee Ernie Claudel is here in the audience from Olathe. And then here later, at some point here in the session, 2 of our trustees are up for confirmation, Brad Stratton from Overland Park and Emily Hill from Lawrence. On the next page, slide 4 then, is the sort of just the quick snapshot of kind of economic investment, actuarial information that I wanted to share with you before we get into CAPERS 3. And oh, what a difference 12 months can make, or oh, what a difference even 2 months can make on the investment front. At the end of December, and the preliminary number now, and I think we're close to the final, for calendar year 2023, the trust fund had a return of 11.1%. And so that added, over those 12 months, that added $2 billion with a B to the trust fund. So now the trust fund's over $26 billion. And so that means, just kind of looking back, the trust fund was about $9.8 billion back in 2000. So it's now really more than doubled in the last 2 decades. As we look at the 25-year rate of return, we're at 6.9%. And of course, our investment target is 7%. So that 11.1%, I think, is where it's going to end up. Is certainly great news. And just as we slice and dice all these numbers, if you look back over the last number of years, the CAPERS Trust Fund, or CAPERS plan, is now in the top 20 most improved state-level plans out of 121 in terms of funded ratio. You know, you may remember back in 2012, we were at 56%, and now we're over 73%. So that does put us in that top tier of most improved on the funded ratio, so which is assets to liabilities. So lots of good news there. Of course, earlier in the calendar year, I was just hoping maybe we'd make it to 0, or that we wouldn't be negative, and then the market does its thing, and with our investment structure anyway, we ended up around that 11.11%. So a lot of good news there, which will help the funding position even more in the next actuarial valuation that we'll get in this next July. On slide 6 then, changes the discussion to the cash balance plan. Some of you may remember it was created in 2012 by the legislature as part of that sort of comprehensive pension reform, long-term funding. Again, that was that low point of a funded ratio, assets liability of 56%. And so there was quite a lot of work and analysis that went in, policymakers, the legislature, and the governor trying to decide what could be best to improve the funding position of CAPERS. And as part of that decision-making that was made was the creation of a CAPERS 3. It's a cash balance plan, technically still a defined benefit plan, but it's certainly has some different attributes of CAPERS 1 and 2. CAPERS 1 are for people that joined before 2009, CAPERS 2 between 2009 and the end of 2014, and CAPERS 3 is for any public employee that, of course, belongs to CAPERS that has joined the system from January 1st, 2015 going forward. And now over 50% of the members of CAPERS, active members of CAPERS, are CAPERS 3. And I think that in some way kind of points out to those, of course, a number retiring, those KPERS 1 members in particular, but just the number of new employees that are coming into public service that may not stay, they may not be that 30 or 40-year career that perhaps some of the KPERS 1 members were. Slide 7 then just kind of tries to give you some of the differences between the traditional defined benefit plan, KPERS 1 and 2, and that the cash balance plan, KPERS 3. It's kind of a mix. Certainly the cash balance plan, I mean, they have their own account. It's a notational account, as it's called. I mean, all the assets remain in the trust fund, does earn interest. People can look at that notational account if they want, but perhaps the most important thing is the risks then are shared between employees and employers, particularly on the investment side to some extent. Defined benefit plan, all the risks is on the employer, none is on the employee. Cash balance tries to balance that risk between employers and employees. The cash balance plan, still retirement benefits are paid for life. When the person retires, then that asset pool then is converted into that lifetime benefit. They're guaranteed at least 4% interest on their contributions. So of course they can never lose it. And of course their notational accounts are just part of the big KPERS trust fund. And so of course it's professionally managed on the investment side. And then the employer contributions are determined by that annual actuarial valuation. So unlike maybe a traditional 401k plan, KPERS 3 members can never lose their account, will always be there, and at a minimum, it's earning 4% interest. And so those, I think, are two fundamental differences between the traditional, like a 401k plan that some of you may be familiar with. On slide 8 then, what does the member put in? The employee contributions then are 6%, just like KPERS 1 and 2. Again, it goes in, it's tracked in their notational account. Of course, they always can, if they leave public service, they can always get their contributions out. The interest credited, and it's 4% guaranteed, I mentioned, and that's on an annual basis. Slide 9 then changes what does the employer contribute. Again, it's the same for KPERS 1, 2, and 3. In the current year, it's 12.57% for the state school employers, a little bit about 9.3 for KPERS local employers for this calendar year. So again, the contributions are all the same. And then this is perhaps the thing that maybe befuddles some people as you try to make the switch from defined benefit to defined contribution. The employers do pay credits. They're making their contributions just like 1, 2, and 3. But as you look on slide 10, as what goes into that notational account, there's a sliding scale of pay credits that the employer contributes, and it's based on years of service. So the first 1 to 4 years of service, the employer contributes 3%, 5 to 11, 4, and then all the way up to once they have 24 years of service, the employer pay credits get up to 6%. And again, the employees contributing 6% all through their service. And so the only way the individual can get the employer contributions is if they retire. But this is the table then that determines how much the employer's contributions are going into these pay credits are going into that individual notational account. Slide 11, just again, the importance of that guaranteed 4%. It's granted, it's guaranteed, annually. It's applied to the member accounts each quarter. And because of that compounding there, since it's applied, it's slightly below 1% per quarter. Slide 12 then just looks at those dividend interest credit, and this is where the employee, the KPERS member, has the chance to share if there's good investment returns on the upside. Again, even if it's less they don't have to worry about anything, losing money because of the structure of the cash balance plan. So they can earn additional credits if there's good investment returns with the KPERS Trust Fund. There's this formula. It's 75% of the 5-year average net compound return above 6%. And so there's a calculation we do. It's the dividend for calendar year 2021 is applied then to the account balance at the end of 2021, and then it's actually credited in the spring of 2022. Slide 13 just looks at that experience on the plus side. You can see over the first 8 years of the KPERS 3 cash balance plan that this formulaic interest dividend credit has applied four times. You can see 2017, 2019, 2020, and 21. The total compounded dividend interest since 2015 is just slightly below 1%, about 0.9%. Our actuary assumes that over time there'll be a dividend credit of 2%, and we'll see how that plays out. Slide 14 then just looks at replacement ratios. Replacement ratios just looks at how much of the retirement income is being replaced in terms of once the person retires. Most studies suggest in total you should be a goal of between 70 to 80% of pre-retirement income is necessary to maintain that lifestyle in retirement. And so, and of course, just note there, of course, KPERS is designed to work in conjunction with Social Security. So Social Security, almost all of our KPERS members belong to Social Security, and that, of course, it varies, but in general, I think our actuary says that will add about 30% to these numbers. These bar graphs on the right just look at the orange one is KPERS 2. The blue one is if they only earn the guaranteed 4%, and then the green one is KPERS 3 if you add on that 2%. And you can see, particularly for the career employee, so that's 30 years of service, where the KPERS 3 is 51%, assuming that those dividend credits are granted, gets you to about 34%, and you can see that kind of through the different sort of career stages. Somebody works kind of early in their career, has 10 years of service but leaves public service. Somebody joins kind of mid-career and has 20 years of service, and then somebody who comes late in their career and their public service career and has 20 years of service. And part of this is KPERS 3, of course, is based also, the earlier we get the money into their notational account and we invest it and they have the chance to earn those dividend and perhaps dividend credits on top of the additional ones, that will grow over time. It's just that compounding. But you can see, again, KPERS 3 versus KPERS 2. I mean, clearly KPERS 2, I think, is working as designed, particularly in 2012 when the intent was to bend down the curve of out-year costs of employers as you get down there, so those costs would be cheaper. I think KPERS 3 accomplishes that goal as well. And so still a defined benefit plan, and I don't think you can underestimate, never lose what you put in, and you're guaranteed 4% are certainly pluses on that, but it is a different benefit structure than KPERS 1 and 2, and I'll certainly just stop there and respond to any questions as appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alan. So even Tier 3 had the 11% return. And so it's really, when you're trying to compare Tier 3 to Tier 2, it's not really a good comparison because it is given a return. And like you said, it does have the guaranteed dividend. So, I mean, there's some benefits to it. I've heard a lot of, negative talk on it the last year, but when you get a good market, which we had last year, it's
I mean, that will help us in that increase, that additional dividend potential beyond the 4%. I'm guessing this year, as it all plays out, or when this calculation is made, it will reflect, an amount there above the 4%.
Questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alan, for your presentation. So when you look at Capers 3 and you got the floor, the 4%, and you got the 6%, if we made a decision to change to 5 instead of 4 or play with it, would that affect all of them in that type of thing? Or would that be going forward with new employees?
I believe it could be structured either way. You could, if you want to turn one of those dials, maybe to increase that, you could either make it from this point forward, or you could backdate it to the start of Capers 3, 2015.
And you have the ability that if we tweak that to say, what would that do to us as far?
Yes, we could, working with our actuary, we could say any impact on the unfunded actuarial liability and then the additional cost of employer contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Conroy. As always, you do a great job. On that last graph, why didn't you, I mean, a couple questions, why didn't you include Capers 1 in that?
Right, and we could do that, I think, for comparison purposes. There's quite a bit of similarity between Capers 1 and Capers 2, still that defined benefit. And then you do get a little bit into the multiplier. Some of the Capers 1 members, you know, if they had a long-term service, might have a different multiplier than 175 to 185. And so anyway, there's just lots of moving parts. And so we could take a run at it if that would be helpful. But I think it's going to pretty much mirror, in the grand scheme of things, the Capers 2 numbers.
Couldn't help but notice the 7% return investment. Didn't we just change that to 6.5% for our unfunded liability?
There was a change, you're right there, went from 7.75 to 7%.
7, that's what it was. Thank you for the reminder. You know, we only hit the dividend increaser, to the chairman's point, 50% of the time. And you only get anything above 7%, is that right? In terms of the additional piece on top of that, it looks like it's a variable amount that when we hit that dividend, you get whatever's above 7%, is that what that number
Yeah,
is?
you get that formula in terms of 75%, you know, above the average in the last 5 years, and so there's all those.
That is convoluted.
imagination.
I mean, it looks convoluted. It's hard to explain when
I'm right there with you on that.
The last point here is just, it looks like the employer contribution really made out on Capers 3. I mean, 3% for the first 4 years, like 4%. I mean, these are severely reduced rates in terms of what the employers are expected to pay. And we don't really talk about that much.
Well, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, that does get you into that pay credits and contributions. Because again, the employer's contributing, you know, whatever the annual rate is for all regular Capers members, 12.57%. But those pay credits, that 3% eventually getting to 6%, that's right, that's what impacts the individual's Capers account. And that was structured, I believe, back at the time, again, trying to drive down cost to the employer. And so that was, I mean, that is one of the levers, you know, if you want to tweak Capers 3, you could do those pay credits, you could do that interest crediting and other ones as well.
Because that is what eventually goes as the benefit to those employees, right? And retirees.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Alan, looking at that last chart, one of the things that Capers 3 did, and it seems that, and as you mentioned, that 50% now of our employees, that was starting in 15, right? So in 8 years, we have 50% of our employees are now in Capers 3. It's a, I mean, any kind of change is, well, timing's critical, because if we're going to make any kind of change. But as I look at this table on page 14, Capers 3, it does somewhat undermine long-term employees, employment with the state of Kansas. Is it, if I'm a career employee and I, looking at under, currently, I mean, under tier 2 of having 51% of my salary when I retire, as opposed to 34, then I might not be staying long.
I mean, I think it's a fair question. That's right. It's by design. It's less than Capers 2 or Capers 1. That's certainly true. And then you add on that 30+% for Social Security. So the Capers 2 people would get right around that 80% goal of, replacing retirement income versus pre-retirement income. But the Capers 3 people, if you add that 30%, would come up something less than that 80%, replacing that income once you get into retirement.
Just as follow-up, I guess it buys into this whole thing that people are working longer. And so that's working after retirement. This is an example of why.
Other questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the last reading, Alan, on unfunded liability that you have?
Right. This last valuation, so it doesn't, of course, capture the 779. But for state school, I think we're right around about $6.2 million. And then all funds, or the whole system, about 9.6 billion with a B.
Billion, not million.
Yeah, billion, excuse me. Yeah. Sorry, I usually always try to get that B in there, a B for billion, and I'm sorry about that. But yes, total system 9.63 billion, the state schools about 6.2 billion.
And that's even with 2 billion this year. So we were over 11 billion. How much of that is reflected in the reamortization? Did that, I mean, that added a ton on.
It did, and of course, this valuation that the board just received in July, just because of the timing, the 1.1 billion that the legislature provided Capers helped significantly offset the down economic return for this last calendar year. So that helped considerably strengthen the position of the portfolio because of that.
And we're still in better shape if we put more dollars into Capers, try to reduce this unfunded liability, then that's probably the best thing we can do. Is that fair to say?
I'd agree with you. This is your debt collectively, the state's debt for school, that's $6.2 billion. It's your obligation. We're charging, in effect, a 7% interest. And so the sooner you can pay that down, there'll be long-term savings in those annual employer contributions. So it'll help you in the budget and reduce your debt.
And we'll have that additional money, hopefully getting that 11%. Any other questions? Seeing none, Alan, as always, thank you. Appreciate you. Committee, that concludes our work for today. We're adjourned.